So I just finished class and I figured I would go ahead and record the rest of this painting process, or at least for the next hour, to show you how I would continue to develop this painting as a reference for future paintings. So in class today, as you can probably tell if you watched the first part of this painting process, I added in a second layer in this part of the wall. I've started to change the hue slightly into a lighter value on this part of the closet door that's leaning into the space of the closet. And then I've kind of worked over a bunch of areas in this space as well. You can tell that I've increased my saturation in ultramarine blue. That was one of the biggest shifts today. And then I also added in a pretty pure tint of burnt sienna. So just burnt sienna and white. So I've started to really play around with the relationship of temperature in a very saturated sense in the context of this painting. So I'm just going to keep painting, and if I think of stuff, I'll just share that with you. But again, one of the ways to approach a painting like this is to think of things in terms of layers. You don't have to get your final painting finished in the first pass. In fact, you can get a lot more interesting results if you work with layers and reveal areas of earlier layers in the painting. So I'm realizing that I could probably make this area a little bit darker and a little bit warmer, just more towards the neutral. So I'm just going to try out a mix and see how that looks. That actually looks pretty good for what I was hoping for. So I'm going to leave that. And I want to fill this wall in. And the two walls at the bottom kind of come together. There's not much of a separation. So I'm just going to paint over this down here. My dog is dropping his bone on the floor, so if you can hear that, I apologize. One of the things I talked about in class today was using your palette knife to fill in some of your shapes, but also to experiment with the quality of your edges. So sometimes you can get some really nice textures by blending shapes together along their edge. And in turn, that'll make a more atmospheric painting. You know, I'm realizing that this area up here was really, really blue. And I'm not sure how much I liked that shape that it was, so I'm going to soften it a little bit up there. think I might need to take Lenny's bone away from him for a little while. Come on, man. Where's your red toy? Let's find your red toy. Just lightly going through and dragging this darker gray color through some of this blue over here. And this is a little too bright right now, so I'm going to paint over this. You okay? Oh. I think you might have some allergies right now. I think I might... So one of the hard parts about painting a room like this is that a lot of the values are very similar, and I still want to create the separation of these two walls coming together in a corner. So to do that, you have to really be subtle about the shifts in value and the way that the line is going to appear and then disappear. So, I've decided to blend the lower part of this closet space because that way the the light reads more that it's hitting the top corner of this room as opposed to lighting up the entire corner, because that's not what it's doing. I think I'm also going to go through and just blend this together real quick too. Put a little bit more medium up here. So one thing is, if you notice an area where you're kind of avoiding something, do your best to just tackle it right away and get something, just, it's almost like hypothesizing, right? It's like, well, I don't know the exact color I need for this, but if I can at least fill it in a little bit and get it as close as possible, then I have more to go off of. So I'm trying to paint a, it's hard to tell, but there's this blanket that's draped over the edge of the shelf, and to the left of that is a bag that houses the air mattress that we have. And both of those shapes, even in the video, you can tell kind of blend into one large shape. I mean, there's some separation along here where you can see a lighter value. So, you know, when I'm looking at it in my painting, I have to figure out, okay, this shape is darker than the closet space. So right now, it's not darker in the painting. So I need to go through with a pretty dark color. And actually, this color that I'm mixing up is almost the same as this. So I need to add more blue and more burnt sienna to this mixture. And we'll see how this looks. And that might be too warm. So let's grab a little bit more blue. It also needs to be a little bit longer in the painting. So I'm just going to slowly move this down. And at this point, it's more important to get the angle right than it is to get the exact dimensions. I can always paint over the lines that I'm making here in trying to get the angle right. So even if I'm mixing into this area, it's not a big deal. I can just paint over that. Or at the very least, soften it with another brush. Okay, it's feeling a little bit better. Also want to bring this up a little bit more if I can. I've been getting a pretty nasty glare up here, and I want you to be able to see the color variations a bit clearer. You know, so you hopefully just notice that I could take my palette knife and starting in the blue, I can slide it over, and I'm pushing down all the way. And it's almost like I'm cutting into this brown shape with my palette knife. And I can do the same thing along the top to get the angle of the top of the box to be a little bit more accurate as well. This might be a little too bright, but that's okay. That's gonna be too bright. I'm gonna switch to some smaller brushes here because some of these shapes are a lot thinner. Try to get the whole painting in here. There we go. Now, because some of those marks I just put in are kind of like dark brown, a dark brown hue, they're popping off of the cooler neutral that I have, and I'm not sure how much I like that right now, so I'm going to experiment a little bit with some different variations of lines and the temperatures that I'm using for the lines. You know, for something like drapery or, you know, this blanket, for example, a lot of times less is more. You know, keeping it more simple ends up helping, I think, most of the time, because, you know, if you're going to try to really describe every single little crease, not only is that going to take a really long time, but that tends to flatten out the painting a little bit more because you're giving so much clarity to something that's far away. Um, you know, you kind of lose some of the atmosphere that you would have had otherwise. I need to go in here and put in this part of a box. Let's see here. You know, and you can really be suggestive in some of these moments that are in shadows because there's less light to describe those forms. So it ends up helping us a lot. And you want to make sure that you're really moving around the surface and not getting hung up on any one particular place. You know, even just putting in this extra layer of a cooler shadow is adding more dimension to this guitar case, which is sitting at the bottom left part of the closet there. It's sort of folded up. There's nothing inside the case, so it has this weird, very organic shape, and it's black, so there's not a lot of variation on it, but, you know, I don't want to just make this big silhouette. You know, I want this to feel like a form that has volume and it has dimension and takes up space, right? So you have to be pretty subtle about things that are in shadow that take up space. Need to get some more paint on my brush here. I'm grabbing a little bit of white because the light from my studio is hitting this part of the guitar case. And that might be too warm. Let's cool this down a little bit again. Yeah, that'll be good enough for now. I'm nervous to go too bright because, you know, you could always go, it's easier to go brighter to work from dark to light. That's what I've found so far, and a lot of other people agree with that idea. So just a couple other lines there. There we go. Okay. So right now this value seems to be really, really light. I think that's too light for this space. You know, it's one of those things where I have to tilt this down so that the light doesn't bounce off the wet paint and create a glare so that you can get a better idea of where my values are at right now. And, you know, I think I need to definitely change this shape here. I think this is too bright as well, so this has to get darkened. So maybe I'll do that first. At least along the top. Okay, that helped a lot. Let's see if I can. I'm going to use a mall stick again, so that way I can have a more controlled line here. I've been avoiding this line that's the bar inside of the closet underneath the shelf. Part of that is because I really hate painting vertical and straight lines. And part of that is also because I was really enjoying this area here and I didn't want to go in and disrupt it. But when something is off, you have to do that. It will help your painting in the end if you can make those corrections and just paint over what you have. And it's not like you're starting over because you already have somewhat of a foundation there. You know, that's the difference. It's not like you've wasted your time. It's just you had to kind of get through this part first to find the mistake that you made. And a lot of times that's what painting is all about. It's just trial and error and the journey of that process, which I think can, you know, be very informative and educational. The other thing I'm noticing now too is that from here to here, that's too narrow of space. It's going to have to be quite a bit longer. I have to drop this line that I just fixed to probably about there. That feels a lot better because then this line over here is going to go across. I might even use part of a ruler again for this. Let's see. So it's probably not even visible on camera, but I just added a line that I can then follow with my brush. Oh, you know what? The problem with that right now is that I measured the wrong line. I was going off of the first line I had, and I just totally forgot that I lowered this. This is the new line here. And I'm just trying to guess at the angle inside the room, but that feels pretty good, especially in relationship to this angle that I have, because I have this at such a sharp angle. This horizon is going to make a big difference if I have it too high up or too far down. But I think keeping it at a slight slope this way is going to help this make more sense. Okay, grab my brush again. You know, because this line is so straight on the wall, I'm gonna have to come in here now and try to fix some of my edges to see if I can straighten this out a little bit. Because I could tell while I was painting it that there was still a slight bend. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that actually. Maybe I'll dissolve it over here a little bit more. Okay, so now I can probably, before I forget, see if I can find. I'm just trying to see if I like the angle of the line I just put in there or if it needs to be sharper. So I'm looking at my reference here. I think that looks pretty good. And this line is actually quite a bit darker than the other ones. I'm gonna grab more paint and get out of this like lighter gray area that I was just mixing in. Okay, pretty happy with that. So I'm just gonna come in here and try to scrape out some of that darker blue that I had, or at least mix it up so that way when I paint over this, that's not going to get in the way of the new color that I have. Also, by blending it out, it's going to make it easier for me to see this as a different shape, as one big shape especially. I think actually all of this can just get blended together right now. So I want to take a little bit of like a brown and just kind of mix it up in here with my palette knife, just to give it a little bit more noise. and distortion, because there is a little bit of reflected light coming off of this brown box that's up on the shelf, and I don't want this wall to just be just ultramarine blue and white. It needs a little bit of reflection of the hue that the box is here. Okay, that looks better. Feeling much better about that. Guess I might as well, if I'm using my palette knife, I might as well go in and try to straighten out some of these other areas here. Let's see if I can get rid of some of this. There we go. Might as well try to blend this a little bit more so this feels a little bit more connected. I wasn't really liking how, hit a big pile of paint right there. So it's starting to feel a little bit tighter now as a whole space, especially inside the closet. So I'm feeling much better about that. You know, some of these blues that I put in here during class, I'm still not totally sold on the amount of saturation I used. I think it'll make the painting a lot more visually interesting, but my personal preference would be to go a little bit more muted than this. And I think I just like having colors kind of in every area of the painting. So like I would prefer to have more browns and oranges up in the blue there, and maybe I'll put those in. Sometimes using a brush can be kind of limiting, actually. You know, we end up making a lot of the same types of marks because we're using a similar tool, and a palette knife can be a great way to offset a lot of the very like calculated strokes that we make with our brushes, and instead using a palette knife, you know, it's a lot harder to control and create the same kind of mark that you would with a brush. All right, I think it's time to get into this now and find the color that I really want to use for that. So I'm going to grab a bunch of white and I'm going to mix it into one of the colors I had here. Now, this part of the frame is not the same as this color that's, you know, this is part of the door into the closet, and my daylight bulb, which is a very, you know, neutral but also like kind of cool light in comparison to the light bulb that's in my studio room. The doorway, or like this door frame, does not look like this. It's much softer, and let me see if I can show you. Oops. You know, especially side by side, like looking at these two colors here. Like this is obviously a lot brighter than the wall, and it's a lot darker than this color inside of the doorway. So I need to find a value that's kind of in between those. And right now this isn't bad, you know, it's just very thin. So I might just try to mix up a color that's similar to this and fill it in and see how that looks. The other thing is that I'm going to try to pay attention to any variation, subtle variation in value in some of these things. Like obviously as we move down, it gets a little bit brighter and a little bit cooler because of this light bulb that I have right here. The light is, you know, following the floor as it goes down and it hits part of the closet doorway there. But in a few minutes, I am going to pause this live stream, and I will probably have to do a part 3, you know, if I decide to record the entire process. We'll see. But I at least wanted to record some of my process so that you could see how the painting is layered and how some of these things start to develop. over time. So now this is still technically my second session with this painting. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit darker here. And a little bit more neutral. This way, if it needs to be brighter in some spots, I can just move up instead of having to make this whole part light. So I was going to add a lighter mixture that I just had here on the whole thing. But the problem with that is, like, let's say this area needs to be a little bit darker. Then I have to go on top of that, and I'd rather have a darker color and then slowly get brighter and brighter and brighter. Because that'll also help give that illusion that something is getting closer to the light source if your lights are stacked on top of your darks, or at least feel like they are. I should probably grab a different brush for this. Let's see, I think this will work. Yeah, actually, I'm pretty happy with this. I think what I'll do is add in a lot more saturation as well. Because I'd like it to at least match the light that's hitting over here. So I'm probably going to have to go back on top of this and add in more of my sienna color. But at least this is giving us a little bit more of a foundation, and it feels more filled out. The doorway also has like multiple layers of wood in the frame. Which then makes it challenging to make sure all the proportions are right and to make sure that the perspective still makes sense. But at least this way I'm getting my bigger shapes filled in first, and then I can resolve those areas in a little while. Let's go with a little bit more sienna, more white, more sienna. So you can see that difference in temperature there. It's subtle, but it's getting warmer. And that's going to help describe the light, the way that the light is hitting this part of the room a little bit better. I'm going to brighten this up and add a little bit more blue. So it's kind of going from like neutral, cool to warm to, neutral, cool again at the bottom. This brush is getting really kind of crazy. It's also good to change up the direction of your brush strokes too. This adds a lot of variety. Okay. So now, let's see here. So I want to paint this box that's over here. It's definitely lighter than the guitar case, which is right here. Well, it's part of the guitar case, but it's still pretty dark, and it's a little bit it feels a little bit warmer than the back of the room or the back of the closet. So I'm going to try to keep it relatively brown, and that should help for sure. See, now I'm realizing that I made the other plane of the box way too high, so I'll have to paint over that. This is a good time to go in with my palette knife and try to fix my line. Just so it makes sense, right? I think that's a lot of painting is just trying to make it feel like it makes sense. So now this is all gonna have to move. Just like scraping paint off over there. Have a little bit of blue. There we go. This feels better for sure. This is another example of that like lost and found edge. Things can just blend together a little bit. All right, don't think I can take this blue anymore. It seems a little out of place. I'm gonna try to neutralize it a little bit in some areas. Let's see what happens if I... There we go. See, but now having that blue underneath this is gonna really pop the orange that I still have in the painting. It's not like I'm totally getting rid of the blue that I had there. Although I have to fix this edge here. I need to give myself a little bit more. Something like that. At least to make sure that this angle is going to make sense. Okay, let's see. Now I need a warm but dark neutral to go in between this highlight on the shelf and then this bar that runs underneath the shelf. I think this should work. It feels similar to this, so maybe with the blue that I have in the brush. And there, it's also pretty dark, this space right here. But at the very least, it's nice to be able to feel like there's some separation going on now. For a while there, it felt like things were just one big mess, and that's part of the process too, I think. And that's okay. It's just a matter of continuously moving things around, making adjustments, softening things, tightening things back up again until it all kind of clicks or feels right. But I'm definitely feeling better. This form here is going to need a lot more work. It's tough because it's pretty much just like this big bag with a very irregular shape and form. So it's not like a box that has, a very clear edge. And it's also lit in a very strange way. It's very like low lit, if that makes sense. It doesn't have much light describing its shape to me. So I have to kind of work with the two values that are there, like this and this, to have it feel volumetric and to have it feel like it's sitting up on the shelf and the light is hitting it in a way that makes sense. And maybe part of the problem is that the transition into the shadow doesn't make sense. Maybe that's part of the problem. So I'm hoping this will help. It feels like it's getting better now. Grab some more burnt sienna. It's actually a little bit darker than that, so let's grab more burnt sienna. Let me show you again what's happening up on top here. And a lot of the color is getting washed out because of how close it is to my light. This is a lot brighter on screen than it is in person, but maybe if I give this a little bit more space. But overall, I think it's going okay. I'm gonna need to spend a lot of time cleaning up some of these shapes that are over here inside of the closet, and then obviously, really cleaning up this highlight. This is probably gonna be the most orange, piece of the whole painting. And then I also am hoping to figure out some of the trim up inside of the frame. That's gonna take a while as well. But this is just part of the process. So I hope you enjoyed watching a few more steps in this painting, and it's probably unlikely that I'll record the last part of my process, but thanks for watching, and good luck on your paintings if you're in class, and I will be uploading again here soon. So take care.